The dust kicked up in small clouds around Jake Morrison's boots as he walked the fence line of his sprawling Montana ranch. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the prairie grass that swayed in the gentle breeze. He'd been mending fences all day, his hands rough and calloused from years of honest work, his shirt soaked through with sweat despite the cooling evening air. Jake was a man of routine, a man who knew his land like the lines on his own weathered face. Every post, every gate, every water trough had a story, a memory attached to it. He'd inherited the Morrison Ranch from his father 15 years ago, and before that, it had belonged to his grandfather. The weight of legacy sat comfortably on his broad shoulders, as natural as the Stetson hat he wore to shield his eyes from the relentless sun. But today, something was different. As he approached the old barn at the eastern edge of his property, the one he rarely used anymore since building the newer structure closer to the main house, he noticed the door hanging slightly ajar. That was odd. He always kept it locked, mainly because the building had become a storage place for old equipment and family heirlooms he couldn't bring himself to throw away but had no immediate use for. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the fence pliers hanging from his belt as he approached cautiously. Mountain lions weren't unheard of in these parts, and though rare, a desperate predator seeking shelter could spell trouble. His heart beat a little faster as he reached the weathered wooden door and pushed it open slowly, the old hinges creaking in protest. The interior was dim, lit only by slivers of sunlight streaming through gaps in the wooden slats. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, and the familiar smell of old hay and aged wood filled his nostrils. At first, everything seemed normal. The old tractor his grandfather had driven sat in its usual corner, covered with a canvas tarp. Boxes of Christmas decorations his late wife had collected were stacked against the far wall, untouched since her passing 3 years ago. Then he heard it, a soft rustling from the loft above, followed by what sounded like a muffled gasp. Jake's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he saw the ladder leading up to the hayloft, where as a boy he'd spent countless hours reading adventure novels and dreaming of far-off places he'd never visit. "Who's up there?" His voice came out steady, authoritative. "This is private property. I'm armed, so you'd best come down slowly with your hands where I can see them." He wasn't actually armed, but whoever was hiding didn't need to know that. The rustling stopped, replaced by a tense silence that stretched for several long seconds. Then a voice, young and trembling, called down, "Please don't shoot. I'm coming down. I'm not armed. I'm not a threat." Jake took a step back, giving whoever it was room to descend. A worn boot appeared on the top rung of the ladder, followed by another. As the figure climbed down, Jake could see it was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her face smudged with dirt, and there was a desperate, haunted look in her eyes that immediately softened Jake's defensive posture. When she reached the bottom and turned to face him, he could see her shirt was badly ripped along the shoulder seam, hanging awkwardly and revealing an ugly purple bruise on her collarbone. She instinctively tried to hold the fabric together with one hand while raising the other in a gesture of surrender. "I'm sorry for trespassing," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "I didn't know where else to go. I've been walking for hours, and I saw your barn, and I just needed to rest for a moment. I'll leave right now, I promise." Jake studied her for a moment, his initial anger fading into concern. This wasn't some vagrant looking to steal or cause trouble. This was someone in genuine distress. He noticed she was favoring her left leg, and her boots were caked with mud, suggesting she'd been traveling through rough terrain. "Hold on now," he said, his voice gentler. "You're hurt. That shirt's torn pretty bad." He gestured toward her shoulder. "And you're limping. What happened to you?" She glanced down at her torn shirt and winced, her eyes welling up with tears she seemed determined not to shed. "It's nothing. I just need to keep moving. Thank you for not calling the sheriff. I'll be on my way." She tried to step past him toward the door, but her leg gave out and she stumbled. Jake caught her by the arm, steadying her. Up close, he could see she was trembling, whether from exhaustion, fear, or both, he couldn't tell. "Easy there," he said. "You're not going anywhere in that condition. At least let me take a look at that leg. And that shirt's torn badly. You can't walk around like that." She pulled away from him slightly, that haunted look intensifying. "I'm fine, really. I just need to go." "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're not fine. You're injured, exhausted, and your clothes are torn. I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm also not going to let you walk out of here without at least some basic first aid. My house is just over that hill. I've got a guest room, medical supplies, and my housekeeper Maria is there. She can help you get cleaned up." The woman hesitated, clearly torn between the instinct to run and the practical reality that she needed help. Jake could see the exact moment her strength finally gave out and pragmatism won. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded weakly. "Okay," she whispered, "thank you." As they walked slowly toward his truck, which was parked near the barn, Jake tried to engage her in conversation, hoping to ease some of the tension. "I'm Jake Morrison. I own this ranch. What's your name?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. "Sarah Coleman." "Well, Sarah Coleman, let's get you up to the house. Maria makes a mean pot of coffee and the best beef stew this side of the Rockies. You look like you could use both." The drive to the main house took only a few minutes, but Jake used the time to observe his unexpected guest. She stared out the window, her jaw clenched, her hands gripping the torn fabric of her shirt. She was clearly in pain, but there was something else too, a wariness that spoke of recent trauma. When they pulled up to the sprawling ranch house, Maria was already on the front porch, probably drawn by the sound of the truck. She was a stout woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that had been a godsend to Jake after his wife passed. She took one look at Sarah and immediately went into mother hen mode. "Dios mío, what happened to this poor girl?" Maria exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "Jake, help her inside. I'll get the first aid kit." Between the two of them, they got Sarah settled on the couch in the living room. Maria disappeared and returned moments later with a well-stocked first aid kit and a pile of clean clothes. "Let me look at that shoulder," Maria said gently, sitting down beside Sarah. "That shirt's torn badly. Jake, maybe you should step outside while I help her." But Sarah spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. He can stay if he wants. He's been kind to me." Maria carefully examined the tear in Sarah's shirt and the bruise beneath. "This needs cleaning, Mija, and this shirt is beyond repair. You need to take it off so I can properly tend to your wound." Sarah's hands shook as she tried to unbutton the shirt, but she was trembling so badly she couldn't manage it. The torn shoulder made it even more difficult, and she let out a small sound of frustration. "It's torn," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't. Can you just take it off for me, please?" Maria nodded and began to carefully help Sarah out of the damaged shirt. As the fabric came away, Jake, who had been standing respectfully near the doorway, caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Sarah's back and sides were covered in bruises, some fresh and purple, others yellowing with age. There were also what looked like rope burns on her wrists. He must have made a sound because both women looked at him. Sarah's eyes went wide with fear and shame, and she immediately tried to cover herself with her arms, but Maria was faster, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Jake," Maria said firmly, though her voice was shaking with anger at what she'd seen, "go call Sheriff Patterson. Now." But Sarah lurched forward, grabbing Maria's arm. "No, please, no police. You don't understand. He'll find me. He always finds me." Jake stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides, not in threat, but in barely contained rage at whoever had done this to her. "Who did this to you, Sarah? Who hurt you?" She looked up at him, tears now streaming freely down her face. "My husband, my ex-husband, I should say. I left him 6 months ago, got a restraining order, did everything right. But he found me anyway. 3 days ago, he broke into my apartment. I barely got away. I've been running ever since." The room fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs. Jake exchanged a look with Maria, and in that moment, they both understood. This wasn't just about bandaging wounds and providing a meal. This was about protecting someone who had nowhere else to turn. Jake knelt down in front of Sarah, making sure to keep his distance so as not to frighten her further. "Sarah, look at me. You're safe here. I give you my word, but we need to call the sheriff, not to make you leave, but to help protect you. Sheriff Patterson is a good man. He's also my brother-in-law, and he'll handle this right." "But the restraining order didn't stop him before," Sarah said desperately. "He doesn't care about the law. He said he'd kill me before he'd let me go, and he meant it. I saw it in his eyes, which is exactly why we need to involve the law." Jake said firmly, "You can't keep running forever, Sarah, and you shouldn't have to. Let us help you." Maria squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "He's right, Mija, and you're not alone anymore. You have us now." Over the next few hours, the ranch house became a hub of quiet activity. Sheriff Tom Patterson arrived, along with a female deputy, and took Sarah's statement with a gentleness that belied his tough lawman exterior. He issued an immediate alert for Sarah's ex-husband, David Coleman, who was wanted for violating a restraining order and attempted assault. Tom also arranged for extra patrols around the ranch, just as a precaution. Maria tended to Sarah's wounds, cleaning and bandaging the worst of them. The rope burns on her wrists would heal, but the psychological scars would take much longer. Sarah was given a room in the main house, one with a lock on the inside of the door, which seemed to give her some small measure of comfort. Jake found himself pacing the front porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. The evening had turned cold, and the stars stretched out above him in an endless canopy, the same stars his grandfather had looked up at decades ago. He'd always thought of his ranch as a place of peace, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. Now it was serving that purpose in a way he'd never imagined. The front door creaked open, and he turned to see Sarah standing there, wrapped in one of Maria's robes, her hair still damp from the shower. She looked small and fragile in the doorway, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for not turning me away, for believing me, for calling the sheriff even though I was scared. Most people would have just sent me on my way." Jake shook his head. "Most people are cowards. You don't turn away someone in need. My father taught me that. Said it was the measure of a man, how he treats those who can't repay him." Sarah stepped out onto the porch, hugging the robe tighter around herself. "I've been so afraid for so long, running, hiding, always looking over my shoulder. I forgot what it felt like to have someone actually care." "How long were you married to him?" Jake asked, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, you don't have to answer that. 5 years," Sarah said. "The first year was perfect. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. Then things started to change, little things at first, controlling what I wore, who I talked to, where I went. By the third year, the violence started. I made excuses, believed his promises that he'd change. It took me 2 more years to find the courage to leave. Jake felt his jaw tighten. That took real bravery, leaving, or stupidity. Sarah said bitterly, "Look where it got me, hiding in a barn, running for my life." "No," Jake said firmly. "Bravery, you chose freedom over captivity. That's the hardest choice a person can make. And you're still here, still fighting. That's not stupidity, that's strength." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called out to the moon. It was a lonely sound, but somehow comforting in its familiarity. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally. "Now you rest," Jake said. "You heal, and we figure out the next steps. Tom's good at his job. He'll keep looking for your ex-husband, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Maria and we've got plenty of room, and honestly, the place could use a bit more life in it. It's been pretty quiet since my wife passed." Sarah looked at him with curiosity. "Maria mentioned you were a widower." "I'm sorry, cancer," Jake said simply. 3 years ago, she fought hard, but in the end the disease was stronger. Her name was Ellen. She would have liked you. She always said this ranch was meant to be a place of healing. Guess she was right. She sounds like she was a wonderful person." "She was, and stubborn as a mule. Kind of like someone else I just met today." Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the first he'd heard from her. It was a good sound, full of life despite everything she'd been through. The next morning, Jake woke early as always. Habits of a lifetime hard to break. He made coffee and was sitting at the kitchen table when Maria arrived, earlier than usual. She poured herself a cup and sat down across from him. "How is she?" Jake asked. "Still sleeping. The poor girl was exhausted. But I checked on her an hour ago and she seems restful. That's a good sign." "I've been thinking," Jake said, "about what she said about her ex-husband always finding her. If he's that determined, he might track her here eventually." Maria nodded grimly. "I thought the same thing. What do you want to do?" "We need to be prepared. I'm going to call in a few favors, get some security cameras installed around the property. I've also got my old hunting rifles locked up in the gun safe. Might be time to clean them and make sure they're ready, just in case. You think he'd come here, risk coming onto your property?" "A man violent enough to do what he did to Sarah. Yeah, I think he'd risk it, which is why we need to be ready. But I also want Sarah to feel safe, not like she's living in a fortress. It's a delicate balance." Over the following days, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Sarah gradually came out of her shell, helping Maria with cooking and light housework, despite Maria's protests that she should rest. Jake noticed she seemed most at peace when she was doing something with her hands, as if staying busy kept the darker thoughts at bay. She also started spending time in the barn, drawn to the horses. Jake found her one afternoon standing by the fence of the paddock, watching his mare, Rosie, graze peacefully. "Do you ride?" he asked, walking up beside her. "I used to when I was younger. My grandmother had a small farm, and I'd spend summers there. It was my favorite place in the world." Her voice was wistful, Rosie's gentle. "If you want, I could take you out sometime. Nothing fancy. Just a easy ride around the property. Might do you some good." Sarah turned to look at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw something other than fear in her eyes. He saw hope. "I'd like that," she said softly. 2 weeks passed. The security cameras were installed discreetly around the property. Sheriff Patterson called regularly with updates, though so far there had been no sign of David Coleman. It was as if he'd vanished. Sarah seemed to relax slightly, though Jake noticed she still checked the locks on her door every night and jumped at unexpected sounds. Then, on a Tuesday evening, everything changed. Jake was in the barn doing evening chores when he heard Rosie whinny nervously. His instincts, honed by years of ranch life, immediately went on alert. Horses didn't spook for no reason. He stepped out of the barn and scanned the property. At first, everything seemed normal. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Then he saw it, a figure standing near the fence line about 200 yards away, just standing there, watching the house. Jake's blood ran cold. He pulled out his phone and called the house. Maria answered on the first ring. "Maria, get Sarah into the safe room. Now, lock the door and don't come out until I call you back. And call Tom Patterson. Tell him we've got a trespasser." He heard Maria's sharp intake of breath, but to her credit, she didn't waste time asking questions. "We're going now." Jake hung up and started walking toward the figure, his hand resting on the rifle he'd taken to carrying since Sarah arrived. As he got closer, he could make out more details. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Even from a distance, Jake could sense the menace radiating from him. "This is private property." Jake called out when he was about 50 yards away. "You need to leave now." The man turned to face him, and Jake saw his face clearly for the first time. It was handsome in a hard sort of way, but there was something cold in his eyes, something that made Jake's skin crawl. "I'm looking for my wife," the man said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "I have reason to believe she's here." "Don't know what you're talking about," Jake said evenly, though his finger moved to the safety of his rifle. "And even if I did, I'd tell you the same thing. Get off my land. Now, let's be reasonable about this." David Coleman said, taking a step forward, "I just want to talk to her. She's confused, scared. She doesn't know what she's doing. I can help her. I can take care of her." "The only thing you'll do is go back to jail, where you belong," Jake said. "The sheriff's already on his way. You've got about 10 minutes to leave on your own 2 feet, or you'll leave in handcuffs. Your choice." David's face twisted into something ugly. "That's my wife you're protecting. You don't have the right." "Ex-wife," Jake corrected, "and I've got every right to protect someone on my property from a threat, which is exactly what you are." For a moment, Jake thought David might try something stupid. The man's hands clenched into fists, and he took another step forward. But then the sound of sirens cut through the evening air, growing louder by the second. David's face contorted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He pointed at Jake, his voice venomous. "This isn't over. She's mine. She'll always be mine. And one day, you won't be there to protect her." Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the darkening landscape. Sheriff Patterson's cruiser came tearing up the drive minutes later, followed by 2 other patrol cars. Tom jumped out, his hand on his weapon. Which way did he go? Jake pointed, and Tom immediately dispatched his deputies to pursue. He stayed with Jake, both men watching as the deputies' flashlights bobbed through the fields in pursuit. "You and Sarah okay?" Tom asked. "We're fine. But that son of a bitch needs to be caught, Tom. He's not going to give up." "I know. We'll get him. I've already put out an alert to every department in the state. He won't get far." But David Coleman did get away that night, vanishing like smoke into the Montana wilderness. The next morning, his truck was found abandoned near the interstate, and after that, the trail went cold. Jake increased security around the ranch. He hired 2 hands who'd served in the military and were trained in security work. Cameras were added, motion sensors installed. The ranch began to feel less like a home and more like a fortress, which troubled Jake deeply. This wasn't the life he wanted, and he knew it wasn't the life Sarah wanted either. She'd become increasingly withdrawn since David's appearance, rarely leaving the house, jumping at every sound. The progress she'd made over the past weeks seemed to evaporate overnight. Jake's heart ached watching her retreat back into herself. One evening, about a week after David's visit, Jake found Sarah sitting on the back porch, staring out at the mountains in the distance. He sat down beside her, careful to leave plenty of space between them. "Beautiful night," he said quietly. "I should leave," Sarah said without preamble. "I'm putting you and Maria in danger. If I go, he'll follow me. You'll be safe. Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere, anywhere, just away from here." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "You remember what I said that first night, about this ranch being a place of healing? I meant that, Sarah. Ellen used to say that some people come into your life when you need them, and some come into your life when they need you. I think maybe we need each other right now." Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "Maybe not, but I know you're brave. I know you're kind, because I see how gentle you are with the horses and how you help Maria even when she tells you to rest. I know you're strong, because you're still here, still fighting, even when it would be easier to give up. That's enough for me. He'll come back," Sarah whispered. "You know he will." "Probably," Jake agreed. "But when he does, he'll find I'm not an easy man to scare off my own land. And you'll find you're stronger than you think, especially when you've got people standing with you instead of alone." They sat there together as the stars came out, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. It wasn't a lonely sound anymore. It was the sound of family calling to each other, of protection, of belonging. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, carefully, life began to return to something resembling normal. David Coleman remained at large, but with each passing day without incident, some of the tension eased. Sarah started writing again, this time with Jake teaching her the trails that crisscrossed the property. She laughed more, smiled easier, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually began to fade. Maria noticed the change in both of them. The way Jake's eyes would soften when Sarah entered a room. The way Sarah's face would light up when Jake came in from the fields. She was wise enough not to say anything, but she saw, and she approved. One particularly beautiful autumn afternoon, Jake took Sarah to his favorite spot on the ranch, a high meadow that overlooked the valley below. They dismounted and sat in the grass, the horses grazing nearby. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, plucking at the grass nervously, "about the future, about what happens when they catch David if they catch him, about what comes next." Jake looked at her, his heart beating a little faster. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. I want to live again, really live, and I want to do it here if you'll have me, not as a guest, but as, I don't know, someone who belongs." Jake reached over and took her hand, the first time he'd initiated physical contact since the day she arrived. She didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand back. "You already belong, Sarah. You have from the start. This ranch, it's meant to be a place of healing, remember, but maybe it's meant to be more than that. Maybe it's meant to be a place where people find each other." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat there together, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to countless sunsets and countless new beginnings. 3 months later, on a cold December morning, Sheriff Tom Patterson called with news. David Coleman had been apprehended in Oregon, attempting to cross into Canada. He was being extradited back to Montana, where he would face a list of charges that would likely keep him in prison for a very long time. When Jake told Sarah, she broke down crying, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of liberation, of a weight finally lifted. Jake held her as she cried, and when she finally pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's really over," Jake confirmed. That evening the three of them, Jake, Sarah, and Maria, shared a quiet dinner together. It wasn't a celebration exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that. But it was an acknowledgement, a turning of a page, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Later, as Jake walked Sarah to her door, she paused with her hand on the knob. "I don't want to sleep in the guest room anymore," she said softly. "I want to sleep in a room that feels like home." Jake smiled. "We can fix that. Tomorrow we'll move your things to one of the main bedrooms, the one that overlooks the mountains. It's got the best view on the whole ranch." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek gently. "Thank you, Jake, for everything, for saving me, for giving me a home, for helping me remember who I am." "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just held the door open." As he lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, Jake thought about the strange path life takes, the unexpected turns, the people who come into our lives and change everything. He thought about Ellen and knew she would approve of Sarah, would probably have been the first to insist she stay. He thought about his grandfather, who'd always said the ranch had a way of calling to people who needed it. And he thought about Sarah, about her courage, her resilience, her gentle strength, about how she'd stumbled into his life on an ordinary afternoon and made everything extraordinary. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying with it the promise of spring, of renewal, of second chances. The ranch settled into the peaceful silence of deep night, sheltering those within its boundaries, offering sanctuary to the wounded, hope to the lost, and home to those brave enough to claim it. In the morning there would be work to do, fences to mend, horses to feed, a life to build together. But tonight there was peace. Tonight there was safety. Tonight there was home.